A woman screamed at me for stealing her seat. We were flying to the same funeral. I have flown that route 11 years. Same airline, same aircraft, same seat every time. 14C. It's an aisle, it's over the wing, and it is the one place on a plane where I have ever been able to sleep. I book it the moment the schedule opens. It's not superstition. It's the closest thing I have to a ritual. I was in it, buckled, when she came down the aisle. She was maybe 50. Gray coat, good shoes, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She had a boarding pass in her hand and she was holding it out in front of her like a summons. She stopped at my row and said, "You're in my seat." I said I didn't think I was, and I showed her mine. She didn't look at it. She said it again, louder. "You are in my seat." I want to be fair to her, and this is the part I've thought about the most since. There was something wrong with her voice. It was too loud and too flat at the same time, the way a voice goes when it's being held together from the inside. But I didn't hear that then. I heard someone yelling at me on an airplane before 8 in the morning, and every single thing in me went hard. I said, calmly, that I'd been in this seat for a decade and that she was welcome to check with a flight attendant. And she came apart. She said I did this on purpose. She said people like me always do this. She said she had asked for this seat specifically, that she had called the airline, that she had explained why, and that, of course, some man had it and wouldn't move. Her voice climbed until the whole cabin was watching. A man across the aisle put his phone up, and I saw it, and I remember thinking, good, get it, get all of it, because I was so certain I was right. The flight attendant came. She was young, and she was very good at her job. She took both boarding passes and looked at them for maybe 4 seconds, and then she said, quietly, to the woman, "Ma'am, you're in 14A, it's the window. Right there." And the woman said, "That's not what I asked for." The attendant said she understood, but that the seat map was what it was. And the woman stood there in the aisle with her boarding pass in her hand and 40 people looking at her, and something in her face just fell in on itself. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She squeezed past my knees without a word and sat down at the window and turned her whole body toward the glass. I felt fantastic. That's the truth, and I'm not going to dress it up. I sat there for the next 20 minutes, glowing with it. I had been polite. I had been reasonable. I had been correct, out loud, in front of witnesses. There is no drug like being publicly right. I put my headphones in and I didn't look at her once. We were somewhere over the middle of the country when I took them out to get a drink. She had a paper napkin pressed against her face, not crying loudly, just leaking, the way people cry when they have been doing it for days and the body has stopped asking permission. And I did the thing I have been trying to figure out ever since, which is that I said nothing. Not out of cruelty, out of a kind of bookkeeping. I had won. Comforting her would have cost me the win. So I looked back at my screen and let a stranger cry 18 inches from my elbow for 2 more hours, and I told myself it wasn't my business. We landed. I got my bag down. She got hers. We walked out through the jet bridge 4 feet apart and never spoke. The service was at 11 the next morning. My Uncle Raymond had died the week before. He was 78 and he was not, if I am being honest, a good man to everyone. He was a very good man to me. He was the person who taught me to drive, and who paid 2 months of my rent when I was 24 and too proud to ask, and who never once mentioned it again. He'd lived out here his whole life, and I'd flown out to see him twice a year for 11 years. That's what the seat was. That's what 14C was. It was the seat I sat in to go see Raymond. The church was small and it was full. I came in late and stood at the back. And she was in the front row. I did not recognize her for a second, because grief takes the shape out of a face, and because she was sitting down, and because my brain simply refused. Gray coat, hair pulled back. She was holding the hand of an older woman beside her, and the older woman was Raymond's sister, my Aunt Vivian, who I have known my entire life. I stood at the back of that church, and my hearing went strange and far away. Her name was Claire. She was Vivian's daughter, which made her Raymond's niece, the same as I was his nephew, and it made her something like my cousin, and I had never met her, not once, in 41 years. There's a reason for that, and it's an ordinary one. Families crack quietly. Vivian and Raymond had a falling out before I was born, over something that by all accounts was small at the time and then was allowed to become large by simply not being addressed. Claire grew up an hour away from an uncle she was not taken to see. I grew up hearing that there was an Aunt Vivian, in the way you hear about weather in another country. She had been trying to fix it. That's what I learned, later, standing in a church hall holding a paper cup. She had started calling Raymond 8 months before he died. She'd driven out twice. They had gotten as far as him saying, on the phone, that he'd like to meet her kids. And then his heart did what hearts do, on a Tuesday with no warning, and it was over. She flew out for the funeral of a man she had known for 8 months and had been trying, at 50 years old, to get back. And she had called the airline days before and asked, specifically, for the aisle seat over the wing, because she does not fly well, and because it is the only place she has ever been able to sit without her chest going tight. And a man was in it, and he wouldn't move. And he was very, very calm about it, and he was very reasonable, and he was completely correct. And she stood there in an aisle in front of 40 strangers and could not explain any of this to any of them, because you cannot explain your whole life to a plane. Then she sat by the window and cried for 4 hours next to the same man who did not offer her a napkin. I want to be extremely clear about something because I have had a lot of people tell me otherwise, and their kindness makes me feel worse rather than better. I did nothing wrong. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. Not one action I took on that plane was wrong. It was my seat. She was mistaken. I was polite about it, and I let a professional handle it. If you play back a recording of that flight, sentence by sentence, you would not find a single line where I behaved badly. And it was still one of the worst things I have ever done to another person. I have spent a long time trying to fit those two facts into the same head, and they don't want to go. The reception was in the church hall, and I couldn't make myself walk up to her. I stood by the coffee urn for 20 minutes. Every time I got close, someone stopped me to say they were sorry, and I said thank you, and I meant it, and then I retreated. It was Vivian who did it. She saw me hovering, and she came over, and she took my arm, and she said, "You're Raymond's boy, aren't you?" And I said I was, and she said, "Come meet my daughter." And she walked me across that room. Claire looked up, and I watched it land. She didn't say anything. Her jaw set. Her eyes went hard and then wet at the same time. Vivian was still talking, delighted, oblivious, saying something about how the family should have done this years ago, and neither of us was hearing a word of it. I said her name, and then I ran out of things I knew how to do. Finally, I said, "It was your seat. Whatever the map said, it was your seat." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I don't want an apology." I said, "Okay." She said, "I want to know why nobody in this family called me." And she was not talking about the plane anymore, and she was crying, and Vivian had gone quiet beside us. He was an hour away my whole life. Nobody called me. And I said the only true thing I had, which was, I didn't know you existed, and I never asked why. That's the part I actually did wrong, not the seat. The 41 years. We did not fix everything in a church hall. That's not what happens. What happened is that she sat down, and I sat down, and Vivian sat down, and we stayed there until the caterers started stacking chairs around us. She told me about the 8 months. The first phone call, which lasted 4 minutes and was the worst 4 minutes of her adult life. The second one, 3 weeks later, which lasted an hour. She told me he'd asked about her kids by name the third time, which meant he'd written the names down after the second time, which is the kind of thing Raymond did and never mentioned. I told her about the driving lessons, about the rent, about how he used to answer the phone by saying, "Speak," like he was annoyed, every single time, for 11 years, and how I would give a great deal to hear it once more. She said, "He did that to me too." And she laughed. And then she cried again. And I finally, 4 hours too late and a day too late and 41 years too late, handed her a napkin. I flew home 2 days later. I did not book 14C. I looked at the map, and I looked at that seat, and I sat in a different one, and it was not a gesture, because she wasn't there to see it and no one was. It just felt obscene to sit there. I couldn't sleep on the flight. Naturally. Here's what came after. Because I think the after is the only part that means anything. I wrote her a letter, not an email. A letter, on paper, because I wanted it to take effort and I wanted it to take time. I did not apologize for the seat, because she'd told me not to and because it was mine. I apologized for the 4 hours. I told her I had watched her cry and had chosen to protect my own sense of being right, and that I had known, in the moment, that I was choosing it. I told her I thought that was probably the most honest description of most of the cruelty in the world. Not people doing wrong, people doing nothing correctly. She wrote back. It took 6 weeks. It was 2 pages and it was not warm exactly, but it was not closed either. We talk now. Not constantly. She calls on Raymond's birthday and I call on hers, and we have gotten as far as a lunch and then a second lunch. I have met her kids. They are 15 and 11, and they are loud and they are very funny, and they call me by my first name because we haven't worked out what else they'd call me. Vivian and I have a standing phone call on Sundays. She is 81. She has told me, in pieces, over many months, what the original fight was about, and I am not going to repeat it here, because the whole point is that it was not worth this. It was never worth this. It was a house, and some money, and something someone said at a hospital in 1979, and every single person who could have fixed it in an afternoon decided instead to be right about it for 4 decades. That's the inheritance. That's what actually got passed down. Not the house. The being right. There's a photograph on my wall now that Claire sent me. It's Raymond at maybe 30 and Vivian beside him, and they are laughing at something outside the frame. I have looked at it 100 times. They look like people who could not possibly stop speaking to each other. I still fly that route, twice a year, out of habit, to see Vivian now instead. I book the aisle over the wing when it's free, because I'm not a saint and it's still the only place I sleep. But I've started doing something, and it's small, and I'm aware of how small it is. When somebody stops at my row now and says something is wrong, I get up first. Before I look at the pass, before I check who's right, I just stand up and I let them talk, and then we sort it out. It costs me about 90 seconds. That's the whole price. 90 seconds of not knowing yet whether I'm the one who's owed something. I wish somebody had told me sooner how cheap it was.